guys to this video on layout. In this one I'm going to show you how you could use the grid control to lay out some text blocks and some text boxes for a line of business application where you're doing something like data entry. So let's get started. Do a new project. I'm going to be doing WPF and we'll call this one GridLOB. Okay, so first things first, we'll just change that title to reflect what we're doing with it. So I'll call it GridLOB. And first thing I want to do is create some rows for my grid. Now I can code that if I like, but I'm going to make life a bit easy for myself by just selecting the grid down here in the XAML. And then if you notice up here in the preview of our actual window, we now have this light blue outline which is representing the grid. So as I hover my mouse over the left hand side of it, we get a plus sign. So I'm just going to click once, twice, 3 times. Now it doesn't really matter if they're even, because we're going to fix that all up a little bit later in the XAML, so it doesn't matter where you click here as long as you've got 3 of them. And I also want to have a column definition because I'd like to have a left hand column which has the text block and then a right hand column that actually has the text box. So again, just somewhere up the top there, roughly where I want it, I'll click once and now I've got 2 columns. Okay, that's all I need to do with the visual side of things. Now I'm going to, well actually no it's not, think about that. We need to add some controls as well, so let's do that. So I'm going to select the text block and I'm going to drag it into each one of the top 3 rows. Just as a reminder too, by the way that Visual Studio and WPF sees these rows, the count starts from 0. So that's row 0, row 1, row 2, row 3. And similarly with columns, that's column 0, that's column 1. Okay, so I've got my 3 text blocks in. Now I'm going to do the text box. And I'm going to drag that across into the equivalent rows, but on our column 1. Again, I'm not worrying too much about the positioning because I'm going to fix that all up in code in a short few moments. Okay, that's all the controls done for the visual side of things. Now let's have a look at the XAML and see what we're going to do to fix up that form. So I'll just zoom in a little bit there for you. Let's start by having a look at the grid row definitions. These were created for us when we clicked on the left hand side of the grid. You can see that each one has a number and then an asterisk. The number represents the size of the row in pixels. So the first one is 54 pixels high, and we have a 55 pixel and a 57, and our final row is 145. The other part is the asterisk, and that's telling WPF that these rows are to be sized proportionally. So that means as the user resizes the window, makes it larger or smaller, those rows will stay relative to each other the same size. So in theory, if the user doubled the height of the window, then our first row would be 108, our second row would be 110, and so on. Now that's the normal behaviour for WPF and row and column definitions, but I don't want that behaviour. I actually want the rows only to be as high as they need to be for the controls that are inside them. So I'm going to make a change to the height, and I'm going to delete the reference that's already in there and replace it with the word auto. And I'm going to do that for the first 3 rows. Remember the last row we're not currently using, it's actually empty at the moment. Okay, so I made that change. You look up here and do the preview, you can see there's really not much difference at all, if anything. And that's because we also need to make some changes to the actual positioning of the text blocks and the text boxes. So that's what we'll do next. Let's go into our first text block. That's what appears here on column 0, row 0. I'm going to change the horizontal alignment from left to right. I'm also going to change the margin. At the moment it's specifying the margin for left, right, top and bottom as individual values. I'm just going to specify them as a global of 5. So that's 5 pixels on each side. Next we have the name. Now the name's important if we want to reference the text block in our code. In this particular scenario where we're doing a line of business, that's not something we need to worry about. So they're only going to be effectively labels just to prompt the user what to type in. So I'm going to delete that reference to the name because I just don't need it. It saves a bit of space. Next we get text. This is actually what's going to appear inside the text block, and that is important. At the moment this says text block, which isn't very useful to our user, so let's change that to what they've got to type in and put in last name. Finally, we can set the vertical alignment if we wish, and you can change that, but I'm going to leave it to the default value of top. Okay, that's all I need to do for the first text block. I'm going to go down to the second text block now, and effectively I'm going to repeat that exercise. So I'm going to set the horizontal alignment to right. I'm going to adjust the margin to 5 pixels. I don't need the name, so I'll remove that. And I'm going to change the text from the default text block to first name. Okay, go down to our final text block, and again, change the horizontal alignment, put a 5 pixel border around it, there with the margin I should say, and we don't need the name, so we'll delete that, and we'll change the text to full name. Okay, so that's fixed up the text blocks, and if we look at the preview up the top there of our actual window, we can see it does look a little bit tidier because I've just pushed those margins in a bit, but it's still a little bit messy with our text boxes, so we need to go and tackle those next. So let's go down and have a look at those. Here's my text boxes. I've selected the first one. Again, the margins are all over the place, so I'm going to take out those references and just put a 5 pixel border around the text box. Now the name for the text box is important because whatever you type in there, I'll want to get to that and access it through code, and I'm going to do that by referencing its name. So I'm going to change that from text box 1 to text box last name. Okay, that looks pretty good. If I scroll across a bit here too, by the way, you can see that I could also change the width of a text box. Now, it's defaulted to 120. That's not too bad, so I'm going to leave it at that for now. Let's go ahead and do the next text box. I want this one to have a margin of 5 pixels as well, and a more meaningful name than text box 2, so let's call that text box first name. And I'm happy with the width of that one too, so I'm not going to change anything there. Down to our final text box. Again, change our pixels to 5 for the margin, and let's change the name to full name, text box full name. And this one's going to have the first name and the last name, so it mightn't hurt if it actually had a wider text box to view it in, so I'm going to make that one 210. Okay, let's go and look at our preview, and you can see now that the auto is working really well for us now, and actually it's actually tucked up right underneath each one of the controls, just allowing for that 5 pixel margin that we've put over our controls. That looks fine. Let's save our work to make sure we don't lose it, and then press F5 to run the application and preview it. And there we go. There's our labels, neat and tidy next to our text boxes. If our user should happen to resize the window, they stay together. And that's an example of how to use the grid with a line of business application.